All right, so now we've gotten to the last division in my recaps for the 2017 NFL Draft, and that's the NFC West. And I'm going to start off with the team who I was impressed by the least, and that was the Seattle Seahawks. And I touched on this a little bit in the biggest losers of the 2017 NFL Draft. Is when I look at the Seattle Seahawks, sometimes you can fall in love with the draft game. You can fall in love with the ability to maneuver, the desire to pick up additional picks, and all of that is great. And all of that can make sense, especially if you're a rebuilding team. But then you get to a point where you're a team like the Seattle Seahawks, and the last really impactful draft you had was back in 2012. You have a roster that is rapidly aging, a window of time to contend for a championship that is closing. You are not in a position right now, in my opinion, where you should be worrying about depth as much as you should be about getting one or two more stars, impact players to put you back over the hump, because you still have, especially with that defense and that quarterback, a lot of the pieces in place in order to win a world championship. But that window is closing. And in recent years, the Seahawks, I feel like, have missed a lot in the draft by emphasizing trading away first-round picks for proven commodities such as Percy Harvin and Jimmy Graham, trading back in other drafts. And I just don't know that it's worked all that well. And while everybody could sit there and praise them for the maneuvering and talk about, oh, they did this and they did that, at some point in time, those results have got to pan out. And they really haven't panned out all that well. And even last year, when you look at the fact they did take somebody late in round one, it was Jermaine Ifedi, the offensive lineman for Texas A&M, and he was god-awful as a rookie, just god-awful. So when the Seahawks traded back a couple of times and got into the beginning portion of round number two, and then gambled on Malik McDowell, who apparently people within the Seahawks organization were split on, I just didn't get it. I get the appeal of the athletic upside and the athletic potential. But the fact is, he was not a very productive player at Michigan State. There were questions about his work ethic, questions about his maturity. And he was one of those guys that seemed to get close on a lot of plays, but just flat out did not make a lot of plays. And he should have been much more physically dominant than he actually was. And to me, I don't see where a team like this should be applauded for trading back a couple of times and getting a guy like this. Now, Malik McDowell is, for him, going to as good of a situation as he possibly could in Seattle, because at the end of the day, they just care whether or not you can play. But you're also going to a defense that has some strong personalities in the locker room with Richard Sherman and Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor and Michael Bennett. You know, you've got some leadership there, but you've got some guys that are going to put your balls to the fire, and they're not going to accept you loafing it and half-assing it. So for that purpose, I look at the Malik McDowell selection and I say, you know, it could work out. But maybe the Seahawks should have been in the reverse mindset, and they should have been trying to trade up in round one and getting somebody like a Garrett Bowles. Maybe they should have stayed their asses put in round number two and drafted somebody like a Cam Robinson. Because if you can't protect Russell Wilson better, it's not going to matter at the end of the day. And that's what astounds me. Even taking Posich, the interior lineman from LSU, you know, again, you're addressing the interior of the line. At some point in time, you can't go with ham and egg jabronis outside protecting the blind side and the other side on the outside of Russell Wilson. As great as your defense is, what will get you back to a Super Bowl and win it is ultimately going to be Russell Wilson and the success of that Seahawks offense, especially without having beast mode Money Lynch back there. And you've got some weapons with Doug Baldwin and Jimmy Graham. Why would you not want to protect Russell Wilson better? I just don't get it. And it's crazy to me because there are still some selections that I really liked for the Seahawks. I love the pick of Shaquille Griffin from Central Florida. I think he's a future starter for them. I think his fit is outstanding. Big corner with athleticism. Amara Darbo has some potential to be a contributor. Tedrick Thompson could be a nickel-dime type of safety guy. So there are some picks that they made that I really, really liked. But again, sometimes you get into the debate of, do you want quality or do you want quantity? And it seems like for some reason the Seahawks are so fixated on the quantity piece, and they really, in my opinion, should be in a quality mode. And furthermore, what's even more ridiculous about it is when you look at Malik McDowell, let's say I'm wrong, and let's say he does pan out. Wouldn't you rather have the potential to have that guy under his rookie contract for 5 years instead of 4? And that's the difference from trading out of the back end of round 1 and going into the beginning part of round 2, especially with a team that pays so many stars big time money. You know, you pay Russell Wilson a ton of money, Jimmy Graham a ton of money, Doug Baldwin a lot of money. You pay Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill, Bobby Wagner, Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas. You pay those guys a ton of money. They take up a big portion of your salary cap. So to me, those late first round picks are precious commodities because you can get potential star players at very reasonable cap cost for half a decade. So it doesn't make sense to give up a potential extra year of that control just because you want to get an extra 4th round pick. To me, that's ridiculous. That's just dumb. But it is what it is. The Arizona Cardinals. It is interesting because I love Haason Reddick as a prospect. He was a top 12, 13 guy in this draft class for me, so they didn't reach for him. I think he's a stud. I like Budda Baker quite a bit. I thought where he was drafted made a lot of sense. I thought it was decent value there. I thought Dorian Johnson is a potential steal in round number 4 if his liver issues aren't that significant. But when you look at the Arizona Cardinals, they missed out on a quarterback. And I've talked about it before. You can talk about they had needs at linebacker. They needed a safety. They needed some help at corner. Maybe some help at wide receiver, so on and so forth. But the only thing that really mattered was getting a young quarterback into the mix. And yet again, they passed up on the opportunity to do so. You can sit there and say, well, you don't want to reach for one, and I understand that. You can sit there and say, well, if the fit's not right, the fit's not right. And again, I understand that. But I find it very hard to believe that there wasn't somebody that was a fit in this draft class. Isn't going to be there much longer. Maybe Steve Keim doesn't want to be the general manager much longer. Maybe one or both of them is going to be gone after 2017, and they don't care about the future.
But you're going to get to a point where Larry Fitzgerald's there forever. Carson Palmer's not going to be forever. Ahkello and Campbell and free agency. You're going to get to a point where you've got to have something in place for the future. And right now, the Cardinals have nothing in place for the future whatsoever. To me, when I look at the Arizona Cardinals, it was screaming, take Patrick Mahomes, Patrick Mahomes. Now, granted, the Chiefs traded up to 10 to go get him. But maybe you could have enticed somebody else to peel back a little bit, and maybe it would have been worth giving up a first-round pick next year because, again, if you don't get that young quarterback, it doesn't matter. And even if you say, well, next year's quarterback class is going to be better, I agree completely. But by that point in time, it might be too late, and the Cardinals might be in a bit of a rebuilding, not retool and reloading mode. You know, even at some point in time, take a Davis Webb, something, and they didn't take anybody. And then trading up like they did for Budda Baker, he's a nice prospect, but I still thought Melon Fonwu was a better prospect. I can't believe they traded up to the Bears slot and gave up as much as they did to get Budda Baker. I was stunned by that. Again, I don't think he was a reach. I think the draft value was about right. But the draft value being right indicates that there were better players on the board at that point in time, which to me there clearly were, including better defensive backs on the board. I'm not trading up and giving up as much as I did in the second round to move up a few spots to take the kid. I'm just not. So I wasn't really that impressed with the Cardinals draft either. It's funny, the 2 best teams in the division I thought had the 2 worst drafts. And it wasn't necessarily related to their draft position. It was the way they conducted their drafts and the philosophy that they had and what they did or in some cases did not do. Now you look at the Los Angeles Rams, you have to factor in that they don't have a first-round pick in this year's draft because of the Jared Goff trade. Well, that has to hurt their grade because you trade up to number 1, you literally have your choice of anybody. And Carson Wentz is screaming, take me, take me, take me. So, of course, the Rams took Jared Goff. And it was terrible. Now, I blame part of that on Jeff Fisher because Jeff Fisher can be very bad for quarterbacks, especially young quarterbacks, and I think you saw that last year. But, man, Jared Goff was absolutely terrible. So, in a draft where you didn't have a first-round pick, you're already at a bit of a disadvantage. You have to do the best you can considering the circumstances situation. And I thought the Rams did relatively well here. What's unfortunate for them was their biggest need was to address that offensive line multiple times. And they just didn't have the talent there in this year's draft to where even if they took some guys, it wouldn't be them reaching, and there's no guarantee that they would be upgrades over the guys they already have.
So that didn't help. But in terms of the other way to help out young Jared Goff and Todd Gurley in the running game, frankly, is to get better in the passing game. And Gerald Everett, Cooper Kupp, Josh Reynolds, all are guys that could potentially be contributors. I really think that Cooper Kupp was the best of their picks in this entire draft. I really like Josh Reynolds a lot, and I think he's got some potential and some surprise upside. Gerald Everett also has some upside, even though I thought there were slightly better tight ends on the board at that stage. I can at least say they tried to give Jared Goff more weapons in the passing game. Will it pan out? Remains to be seen. But at least they're trying to help out the young quarterback, which is better than I can say for some other organizations who will draft a young quarterback, get a young quarterback, and then not do anything to really help him. At least the Rams did that here. They're saying, hey, Wade Phillips, you're supposed to be this 3-4 defensive genius. We won't give you a ton of help on the defensive side of the ball. You should be able to get us to the level we're supposed to be with a defense built around a guy like Aaron Donald, which he should, because he's a beast. But the surprising thing is that the big winner in the draft for the NFC West was the San Francisco 49ers. There's a lot of hubbub and uproar about when John Lynch was hired. I thought, there's a precedent here that this could be very good. There's a precedent here that this could be very bad. Ultimately, only time will tell. But I think if you're a 49ers fan, you know that there's a lot of work to do, and there's a long way to go. But you have to feel good about the way this first draft was run. And I thought one of the best, most insightful pieces of journalism that I've seen in quite some time from a sports standpoint came from Peter King, who was embedded in the draft room of the San Francisco 49ers to the point where it was so insightful that I wish more teams would open up their draft rooms to journalists to kind of give an inside peek into kind of what happens. Maybe you don't want to sit there and give away your mentality or mindset, but those things can change from year to year. But it was a fascinating read, going through what happened with the Bears wanting to trade up from 3 to 2, the fact that they had Solomon Thomas and Reuben Foster as the second and third best players on their draft board, and the fact that they were able to trade down, get multiple picks, including a third rounder in 2018, and still get their number 2 player in the draft, my number 1 overall prospect in this draft is Solomon Thomas. And then for them to be able to peel up to 31 from the beginning portion of round 2 and get Reuben Foster, who could potentially be a top 5-10 type of talent out of this draft class if his shoulder holds up, I thought it was really good work for the 49ers. I liked the selection of Witherspoon early in round number 3. I loved the pick of Kittle in round number 5. He's a tight end that could potentially surprise a little bit. I thought they went off the rails a little bit with C.J. Beathard and Joe Williams, I'll be honest. But so often I talk about this is that when new front offices, new coaching staffs get in charge of a program for the first time, their own program for the first time, their first draft, frankly, can be a bumpy road. Their first draft could be a bit of a learning experience. They can have a learning curve, and it can end up not going that well. You really have to start judging front offices based off of their second and third drafts. So it's encouraging to see that the San Francisco 49ers did some good things here. It was a start. And again, they have a long way to go. They didn't reach for a quarterback until round 3, where I thought they massively reached because I didn't have a draftable grade on C.J. Beathard. But, maybe they're looking at him as a worst case scenario, long-term backup. And if he is a long-term quality backup in the NFL, then he was probably worth a late round 3 selection when all is said and done. But to get 3 potential future defensive starters, 2 potential Pro Bowlers in Solomon Thomas and Reuben Foster, I thought was really good work for the San Francisco 49ers. You could say, well, what about their offense? And that's a concern. But you did bring in the offensive-minded head coach. Maybe he could do some things on the offensive side of the ball. But again, maybe they're looking to 2018 in the draft. Maybe they're looking to 2018 and potentially acquiring Kirk Cousins. The San Francisco 49ers team was so bad that you couldn't just take offense for the sake of taking offense in a draft that was vastly superior overall on the defensive side of the ball. The 49ers took players, especially early, that made a ton of sense for them, and I thought got very good value in the grand scheme of things, and came out big winners. It was an impressive initial run for John Lynch at the helm of the 49ers draft room. And if this is an indication of what's to come for 49ers fans, it's going to be a long road, but the payoff could be very rewarding.